Every time you watch my Halloween Mania intro throughout this month, you notice that clip at the beginning that's from Malo Malo Heroes of Pure Heart. Granted, I watched the episode after I edit the intro, but I've been thinking about including an episode review involving this show, considering that it's one of the last Cartoon Network shows that I have yet to watch when it comes to interests. And while Halloween or Christmas doesn't exist in this universe, they managed to make a horror/terror episode centering around a person's fear, and I felt like that was the greatest way to get into this show, even though that I'm not gonna get into it entirely when it comes to binge watching it. So I'm gonna be reviewing Fright as Malo Malo's Heroes of Pure Heart. The episode begins with a Kane getting out of bed because he's having stomach problems, not really stomach problems, but hungry problems, so he took the cake to have a midnight snack, but then he saw something while dropping the cake, which leads to him pulling the distress signal from Malo Malo and his friends to some investigation in the palace. When the Kane is disturbing the investigation after hiding from the main characters, they decide to do exposure therapy on the Kane, since that he has a fear that he is hiding, but he refuses to tell the other characters. And to be perfectly real with you, that's literally the entire plot of this episode. So where does the horror aspects come from? Mainly the fear from the Kane. I also had last minute decisions when it comes to this show, mainly the fact that there was an episode where Malo Malo is afraid of puppets. But the reason why I picked this episode is mainly the fact that the meaning behind this episode and the moral behind this episode felt a lot more accurate, and to be perfectly real, I found the character being afraid of puppets really poor. I mean, I understand I did a lot more in this month, but at the same time, I just found this episode's element a lot more better than the element of Malo Malo being afraid of puppets. Granted, I still have to watch that episode, but then again, it's likely a less alternative for what I have at the moment. If you expect me to talk about the characters in this episode, since this is the first time I'm talking about this show, I'm sorry, but some of the characters gave me less to think about other than Malo Malo and the Kane. Because considering that Malo Malo is the main character of all this, along with the Kane, who is mostly the main character in this episode, I've got the impression that this episode was mainly focusing on how it's important to keep things to yourself, but when it's really important to other people that they won't be judgmental, which is what Malo Malo and the others are somewhat. It really feels like the over-exaggeration in this show was something that I didn't expect, but at the same time, that doesn't make this episode any better. But it's not any bad as I thought. When it comes to the Kane, which I don't have the full name of when it comes to his real initials, I'm going to assume that he's some of a drama queen like Royalty from My Little Pony. That's mainly my assumption, and considering that maybe way earlier he was actually likable, and he's probably likable in this, but the way I'm seeing it, it really feels like that he's having a difficult time being honest with the people who are helping out, considering that they're a lot more different than him. I felt like that even though he may be unlikable at some points, mainly of how he treats the other characters, to tell you the truth, if I really think about how the comedy and writing of this show works out if I watch more of this show, maybe I will get an understanding, because since I said that this show is over-exaggerating, it really feels like every single character may be likable, but can go a lot more over the top. And to be perfectly real with you, I've seen a lot of over-the-top characters from other cartoons. But this show is also fast-paced. Believe me when I say this, the pacing in other shows, mainly from Cartoon Network, are good in their own way, but in this show, it really feels a lot of mood whiplashing a lot, with Adorabat freaking out by telling the Kane what is wrong with you after acting nicely. I'll admit, it actually felt humorous at first, and it kind of makes sense considering that Malo Malo and his friends are way too tired to help out Kane. But every time I look at these jokes, it really feels like that they're throwing it at our faces. Believe me, it really feels that way. Granted, it's not done badly, but whenever I look at these jokes in particular, it really feels it that way. And judging of how we get to see other characters who have main focus in their own episodes before this, I'm gonna be really real with you that every time I look at these characters, they're not terrible, but at the same time, it didn't got me entertained. And to be perfectly real with you, as much as I didn't like Craig of the Creek that much when it comes to me not being invested in it completely, at the very least, I can totally understand where it's coming from. And in this, I try to understand what they're trying to do, despite this being my first episode watching of this show. Well, its premise has a lot more meaning if I watch the other episodes, but the way this episode is structured, especially since the ending involves a song from Kane, which is somewhat good on its own, but for me personally, it really feels phoned in. Maybe there's a reason onto why not getting into the show right away could have been a better choice, but there's a lot more that I'm missing out, am I? So let's go talk about the main character, Malo Malo, who, for me personally, it really feels like that his voice acting and his design may be good, but when it came to how he's portrayed in this episode, he gave me less of an impression of him than I thought. Though then again, that's mainly the fact that he probably had a lot more development before this episode, and judging of how this episode is executed, maybe he's portrayed that way because he needs some sleep. But for me personally, he has nothing to work with other than facing off his fears of the Kane, which isn't really his fear, only for him to reveal that he's afraid of telling his opinion in front of Malo Malo and the others because of how judgmental they are. But considering what he ends up doing at the end of this episode by helping out the Kane's problems, it really feels like that the motivation that I see involving Malo Malo is understanding the stress and fear of others, while understanding the other aspects of other characters' motivations. Granted, it may not be true considering that this show is mainly about adventure and action, and while there are action and adventure in this episode, but it's not enough in comparison to other episodes that probably had a lot of more of that. Now, the feel from the Kane is, like I said, it involves expressing his opinion in front of people who may be judgmental, but his real feel is mainly him being wigless, which the title Fright wig kind of makes sense up until the very end of the episode. Like, you assume that in the beginning it was someone else, but since that Malo Malo and the others catch on ahead of time, I guess that the positives I've seen is that the characters can see something way ahead while the Kane is hiding something. Though then again, this feel is weird, but at the same time, people who are bald probably have a fear of not having their hair grown back or mane, if you're an animal that is. And the ending itself, it was bizarre. It's not bad or cringe, but it felt bizarre in a way that it kind of works, and I can instantly tell that this is anything but bad. But to tell you the truth, it really feels like that this entire episode gave me the impression that there was a lot more going on in other episodes than this, and the whole aspects involving this is mainly feel. Then again, Halloween has kids being in feel, so it's somewhat accurate. As for the animation, I like it, but not as much as the other animations from other Cartoon Network shows. Like, it feels a lot more expressive and a lot more detailed than I thought, But in all honesty, considering that they'll probably put more focus on the animation on bigger aspects in other episodes, it really feels like that they focus the animation the least in this. Granted, the visuals may be good, and the heads of talking, mainly the heads talking bits from the other characters felt natural, since that it's probably common when it comes to anime. I'm going to assume that they only had that element when it comes to anime in this episode. Then again, when it comes to how the environments are integral to the characters' motivations and personalities, I'm going to assume from where Malo and his friends live, they pretty much put more focus on that location, knowing full well that that's mainly where they live, and of how it establishes Malo's friendships and development. Then again, that's mainly my prediction, since I haven't watched more of this show yet. But again, I need to get into my opinion of this episode before I get into my conclusion of this show itself. This episode was meh-ish, which is something I don't usually describe, but at the same time, this is the first time I'm ever watching this show, and for how this episode is executed, I really felt like I think it could have been handled a lot more better, knowing full well that other episodes may be superior over this. And when it comes to this show itself, it's mostly a mixed bag, but all I'm gonna remember is that this show will probably never return, judging of how it's one of the victims of the HBO Max releases, mainly being released and pretty much not coming back due to Warner Bros. Discovery messing up everything, since that the person behind all of this is one of the reasons onto why animation is dying. Granted, it's not dying completely, but even Cartoon Network can't be able to do anything about it due to the position that they're in. Yes, I know it's annoying, but to tell you the truth, it's difficult to ignore it or move on from it, knowing full well that Cartoon Network did a lot more, and the fact that this is one of the only shows that I didn't watch from them when it comes to the present, it's difficult to consider this as a Cartoon Network classic for how it only has one season, and the fact that the series is officially cancelled due to what ended up happening last year in August. Granted, I understand that not every single cartoon will have so many fans when it comes to popularity like Steven Universe, but to tell you the truth, since that Victor Infantino manages to get 3 seasons, and even if it didn't get a conclusion, it manages to last longer in comparison to Malo, since that both shows were released in 2019. There was a lot going on behind the scenes that it's really, really depressing that shows like this and Infinity Train didn't get the attention it deserves. Then again, I have to watch more of this show to understand why people enjoy it, but my ability to binge watch has been shortened down to the point that it's difficult to get into shows that are new to me. The only thing I will say is that I might review another episode from Malo that is actually important than the one that I've reviewed today, but I don't know for sure, especially since I might review it either next year or later. Like I said, this show was something I had in mind of talking about somewhere near the future, mainly the fact that it got me somewhat interested, but at the same time, this was the only way for me to talk about this show when it comes to Halloween related. I'm giving this episode a 6.25 out of 10.